All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you're in. Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. This is Gene Richardson from Experts Exchange, and we're the community that connects people and information to solve problems, inspire learning, and influence the future of technology. So you've joined the webinar today by Webroot to discuss a really important topic, multi-vector protection from cyber attacks. And I know our speaker is going to give us a definition of multi-vector, so we're all on the same page on that. He'll help us dive into the complexities of modern cyber threats and why only multi-vector protection can keep us secure through the various stages of a potential cyber attack. Just a few housekeeping issues. Hopefully you can hear me. If you can't, then I'm not sure I can help you there, but I know you will start putting stuff in chat there on the GoToWebinar panel. There's also a question section. As George is talking today, please, if you have questions, we'll be watching those questions and we'll try to get to them ASAP, if not right towards the end. So I did mention George's name. Let me introduce him. George spent the past 17 years in the IT security industry. He's worked for Computus Center. I might have not said that right, George, I'm sorry, but that's Europe's leading systems integrator, and more recently, he was a global product marketing lead for ClearSwift. He spent the last 7 years here at Webroot as a product marketing manager, and George, take it away. We're excited to hear about multi-vector protection.
Hi, everybody. And as Gene said, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks for attending today's webinar. Putting an MVP in your client's cybersecurity lineup. This is not a long presentation, just to sort of assure you before we sort of kick off. It's about 30, 35 minutes, depending how far I wander away from the slides and get into other topics, because I tend to do that a little bit when I'm presenting. It's intended to give you a view of why MVP, and in this case, it's multi-vector protection and not things like most valued professional or Microsoft valued professional. I know MVP is used in a lot of different ways, but it's supposed to give you an idea of how this is essential to fully protect clients and users, and not just the devices themselves. And I think something that's been very different about Webroot and very different about our approach to endpoint security and securing, if you like, organizations is that we pay as much attention to securing the user as we do to paying to securing the device. And in fact, because of that, we're actually launching some security awareness training. Like the middle of next month, we'll have something out in that area as well, because we feel that human factor is so key. So let's just look at the agenda today, what we're going to go through, what we're going to cover, and get the slide to advance. Yeah. So I've split this into 3 sections, and in fact, the first couple of sections are quite quick. They're like a slide each. The first just looks at generally protecting online access, and I just wanted to say to people, that MVP. I mean, we talk about multi-vector protection, but it's really talking about a very sort of familiar thing in the security industry, which is actually that you need protection at different layers, and that you need layers of protection to do things. So I'm going to discuss some general layers, which is really how the first slide there, which is securing the connection of the user and the device. And then I'm going to go into actually one thing we have, particularly a layer thing, which is an identity and privacy shield, which is really an example of that user level and how that can really sort of cut down sort of the risks that coming into the organization in the first place. And it is, and in fact, that's a whole lot of layers in itself. And then I'm going to do an example of multi-vector protection in action. So what I want to really do is actually take a phishing example and take you through that. So a little bit more detail of that when I get to it and when we're coming to it. So really the first slide I have is securing the user and the device, and I'm going to be brief, as this really looks at data protection and security, as I said, in a more sort of general way. I think a lot of people got to remember, one of the critical things is to have access policy controls. It's about who has access to what, from where, and when. And in endpoint context, this is important too, as these permissions can be used by ransomware, malware to sort of propagate and spread widely with your clients. So you've got to think a lot of malware will come in, it will look at the permissions of that device and that user. And if you haven't got good access policy controls, it can wander away. access policy is really about who has access to what, and I said, and from where, so that's really important. A VPN connection is also something else that's invaluable, and particularly these days we're seeing, there's lots of remote users, lots of mobile users around there. So having a VPN and some sort of VPN infrastructure in place to let users securely connect when they're sitting at an internet cafe or, using the free Wi-Fi at an airport, all places where, it's quite likely other people can actually hijack, in fact, those sessions and listen into those sessions. Very key to have those sort of things in place. And it also obviously secures, the data flows, because if there's any data being exchanged there, obviously that's exposed at the same time. Strong authentication is something which I think is we're going to go see more and more of. We're starting to see it creep a little bit into actually a lot of the services we use online. That they'll ask you, they'll send a verification code to, for instance, to your mobile phone and say, well, you can get access, but you need to use you put in your username and password, then they send you the verification. So that strong access authentication is something that's more and more common, and I think something that organizations tend to ignore. They tend to rely a little bit too much on passwords. And we can see the impact of that, because I just read an article this morning which was saying that, part of the Equifax hack, which is sort of like, in my view, well, I won't say in my view as that, but it shouldn't have happened really. But I mean, there were servers there sitting with, admin as the password and admin as the username. This, from a company that's protecting people's, most sensitive information is just, anyway, I won't get into that. I don't want to say anything really publicly too much on that. So, credentials protection is also something, is when even if you're not using a VPN and you're sort of, you're in a situation where you don't have a VPN, to protect credentials is very key. And I'm going to cover that a little bit actually in the next slide and deal with it there. Because you want to be able to stop, obviously, sensitive information from being hijacked. Finally, a great, data security maxim, and something I just always mention, always goes back to my sort of initial training in security as CIA, and that is, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and to be able to look at different data and identify the data you have and apply that CIA rule to it, and decide your policies about access and how you want that data to be used and needed. I think a lot of times I'm quite surprised that, I know we live in an internet-connected world, but it doesn't mean to say that we need to connect everything to the internet too, or make it available via the internet. And I think organizations seem to think, and even smaller companies need to think more closely about that, about whether that device really does need to be connected or not. So that's a bit of a general start, but let's move into a little bit more of a specific. So one of the features, and I mentioned this at the beginning, that we always, we want to protect the user as much as the device, and obviously, as more and more things go online, and you're sort of using credentials to in your browser sessions to connect, it's really, really key that there's some sort of identity and privacy protections going there. So we have an identity and privacy shield. I think we just call it the identity shield, but it really does both. And it's specifically designed to protect users' information and the transactional data that could be exposed, during an online communications and transactions using a browser. But actually, you can actually apply this to. You can actually decide as an organization or as a policy that you can apply it to actually any applications. It could be any application that's doing that communication. And what we're trying to do really basically is we're using sort of like a kernel lockdown of the operating system, which means we're going down to the very lowest level of the operating system, and it's designed to neutralize things like what we call, phishing attacks that way, DNS poisoning, keystroke logging. So if you had a keystroke logger on the machine already, it wouldn't be able to see the keystrokes you were putting in, etc. Things like screen grabbing, cookie scraping, which is where they take information from cookies, clipboard grabbing, which is quite a common way of getting information to, and really all these browser and session hijacking things that you tend to see with malicious software that manages to get into the browsers too. And it automatically looks for things like online identity threats by analyzing the websites being browsed and detecting and blocking any malicious content coming from those as well. And it verifies what each website that a user visits to determine its legitimacy, and analyze things like the IP address to determine if it's been a redirection or the site is on one of our blacklists, etc. So it does a lot of things, but it basically is designed to stop websites from creating high risk by getting hold of tracking information and doing things like that, and prevents programs from sort of really accessing users' protected credentials. So we all use things. I mean, we use things like Salesforce. I can think of, very other sort of many other remote tools. We use even GoToMeeting that we're using today. We've logged in over the internet probably to that. So if somebody wanted to get those credentials, then obviously they could if you didn't have some sort of protection in place. So a lot of sort of advantages for having an identity and privacy shield, but basically the whole idea is that you're starting to protect the user. You're actually putting layers of protection in place. You're putting multi layers and multi ways in place of actually stopping that. So let's go on a little bit from that. And I said, one of the things to understand, now I'm sort of going back really to endpoint security, is about protecting the device as well. And there's some very good information out there. I mean, this source is from Forrester Wave, their endpoint security suites, Q4 2016. In fact, this was something we weren't actually in. And then Gartner have another version of this, and this one says prevention, detection, remediate, and the Gartner one says predict, prevent, detect, and remediate. And in fact, we do the prediction part very much in our solution. You'll see some of that as I go through that. What I think this is good about doing is really explaining the different layers, even within an endpoint, if you like, just about protecting the device, about multi-vector protection, if you like. And I think you find a lot of the products around these days, especially the next generation products, which I actually consider ourselves one of, they're very good at that sort of detection stage. They're not very good, whereas we are at the prevention stage, and they're not very good at the remediation, but they're very, very good at that detection, and maybe actually very good at the attack containment, but they're not necessarily very good at actually maybe doing the remediation of the vulnerability that's been found in the first place. So something to think about when you're thinking about your endpoint security is to put it into this context, which I think, from the analyst point of view and actually from an understanding point of view, gives you a very good idea of actually what's going on and what to consider. So that sort of leads into really me sort of going through an example of some sort. And one of the things I really like every year is there's Verizon. They have their data breach investigation report. And the 2017 one, which came out this year, really found that phishing was behind 90% of the security incidents and breaches in 2016. I've got some other stats as well. I mean, somebody saying was yesterday, I think there's a stat from PhishMe, another company, saying that 97% of ransomware was sort of due to phishing attacks. So those two things are inexorably linked together. So phishing and ransomware are sort of, the two sides almost of the same coin at the moment. It's not that ransomware can come through other methods, because it can, because we've obviously seen with things like, NotPetya and even with WannaCry, they were originated in different ways. But a lot of it's through spear phishing and phishing. But that statistic on its own, that the fact that nearly 9 out of 10 security incidents and successful breaches, that's staggering when you think it's all managing to sort of flow down, those particular attack vector side, which is phishing. Another thing, the stat on the other side is that, when we look at all the infections that are trying to infect our customers, and we identify those particular files or processes that are doing that, 94% of all that malware is unique to that single endpoint, to that actual individual. So it just leads back to the idea that if you think you can have a great big database of signatures to protect you against different attacks, and that sort of methodology of preventing malware, that really is now pretty useless and pretty redundant. And yet a lot of the AV vendors still do regular updates of definition files and signatures and things like that. And I think it just clogs up the machine, uses lots of space, and reflects a rather old approach, because I mean, they're not protecting really against anything, to be honest with you, which is a bit disconcerting when you think they're still doing it. So just to point that out. So obviously phishing is the key thing. Gene said I'd try and define multi-vector protection. So I think this slide almost covers it in a way that, you've got an attack vector stage. So I mean, that could be something like, you're attacked through an email, through a link in there. It can be a web browser attack. It can be display ads, malvertising, if you like. Obviously hyperlinks which come in. It could be files that are actually trying to be used to do that. So that could be any sort of file. It can be obviously an executable file, but could be other files. You get social media apps, etc., which apps being used as attack vectors. Applications, if you like, just generally being used as attack vectors. And you can plug in obviously devices like DVDs, CDs, USBs, even a Bluetooth connection. There's considerable worry in the security industry about Bluetooth vulnerability, particularly among phones at the moment, and the fact that literally if you've got Bluetooth, you're exposed pretty much at the moment. So there's a lot of concern there. So they're all different like attack vectors, and multi-vector protection means just basically that for each of those particular vectors that you've got some sort of protection in place. So we have a number of, at the bottom of that slide there, you'll see web threat shield, identity shield. So we have sort of some basic things in place. I mentioned the identity shield earlier on to actually sort of prevent things from happening in the first place. Now things like the infrared shield, for instance, is looks at the user's behavior, and if they're very risky in the websites they go to, then we turn up the heuristics, if you like, automatically in the background, so to reduce the risk, or you can sort of almost like start to alter policy on the fly. Then we're not quite got to that stage, but I'm sure we'll get to that very soon, where we're actually changing the policy almost on the fly according to the user behavior that's involved, and technology is stretching more and more that way. The payload delivery stage is obviously when something comes down. So that's it's using adware, spyware, it's ransomware, whatever it happens to be. It's the actual payload that's going down there. And the thing to mention about ransomware, I mean, people often think the ransomware attack is bad, but actually a lot of times there's other things like rats, there's Trojans, there's a whole lot of other things being downloaded at the same time as the ransomware. So the ransomware is not necessarily the only problem that the organization is actually going to face. There might be a whole lot of other sort of attacks that are sort of buried along with the ransomware attack and are happening, and because it hasn't been identified, obviously, that's a bad thing. And obviously we have a lot of protection at that area as well, at that stage, to try and actually stop at that payload delivery stage before the payload executes, before it actually infects the machine, actually trying to stop things at that stage too. So again, a whole lot of defenses at that stage and vectors at that stage. And then you come to the infection remediation stage, and you'll see my note up there that no one can prevent 100% of infections. So it's critical that you can remediate, and that's going to be easy and fast and comprehensive. So some form of a remediation is a very key thing. And I'd also just underscore that one, that no one can prevent 100% of infections, because I see a lot of organizations out there, that some of them that compete with us, and they tend to sort of infer that they do, and really basically because if a hacker wants to actually bypass an endpoint security system, they'll just test and test and test until they find a way by it. And so I would just sort of say we're in a constant, people talk about an arms race, but we are in a constant arms race with the hackers, and they're finding ways around defenses or above or below defenses, and we're constantly trying to lock those down. And that's something that continues to go on in the industry, and we don't particularly talk about so much as maybe we should. But anyway, again, you got that infection, and then you got that remediation stage. So let's take you through looking at that in a little bit more depth and going from there. So as I said, I'm going to look at phishing, and I wanted to look at phishing, as I said, because it was such staggering statistic that 9 out of 10 successful breaches were a result of the phishing last year. So this is a typical sort of way that phishing would happen. You receive a phishing email, it comes through, it's actually from FedEx, or it's from UPS, or it's from, actually there's some great stats out there in the industry about actually what sort of phishing email would come down in the first place. And obviously you might be expecting a package, and you might actually just click on the link. And a lot of people just click on the link anyway. So it's, again, that's why it's so key to have a security awareness training factor. And obviously that opens up the browser, and Bob's your uncle. You get infected with something, or something comes out, and you get to a malicious website. It's disguised as maybe a legitimate one often, and down comes the payload onto the machine. So let's see how we can deal with those various attack stages and those vectors as such. So when the email came in originally, obviously it had a link in it. So if the user happened to click on that link, we have something called our web threat shield, which basically looks at the categorization of the site, looks at the reputation of the site, and has sort of like a score, if you like, based on that. And And really at that stage, if it's a link that we know something about and actually have a lot of experience of, we'll actually stop and block it at that stage. So it's even before you reach the website, if you like to think the attack has been thwarted, if you like. So the user, there's no risk for further downstream from that at all. We have huge intelligence in that area. I mean, to give you some sort of context on that, we have about 50 plus other vendors that license our Bright Cloud Threat Intelligence to use in their systems and with their customers. So obviously, this is not only our own data, well, it is our own data, but it's also the feedback information, the feedback loop from all those other vendors as well. So we have, from a web threat and a web, an understanding of the space. I think we scan the entire internet about 3 or 4 times a day. We handle something like 500 billion different internet objects per day, including sort of infectious files and things like that. So you're talking about huge numbers, and that, I mean, I think one of the real key benefits of Webroot is the fact that we keep that data bang up to date. So we're pretty much turning it into actionable information in real time. So we stop a lot at that stage. Unfortunately, we don't have everything, and it's just impossible. So if it's really something we're not sure about, then we turn on what we call our real-time anti-phishing defense, and that's actually something that Gmail have just introduced, exactly a very similar thing recently. I noticed about a month ago, Gmail announced they'd actually launched a real-time anti-phishing service. Ours has been going about 3 or 4 years now. So it uses machine learning, all the sort of, all the buzzwords and things you expect from security vendors these days. But generally, this is very clever technology. And what it does is it supersedes in place of the actual user themselves, and it looks at the URL that we're going to go to, and then does a whole lot of checks on that. Is it spoofing the address? Is it, there's a whole lot of different behavioral checks. Really checks the site out very, 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 very thoroughly to determine with almost 100%, but it's not 100%, but almost 100% accuracy whether it's a phishing site or not. So if you imagine this Verizon scenario about those successful breaches, really basically between these 2 defense layers, between these 2 sort of, then there's multi layers that we have there, we are basically stopping about 99% of all ransomware or phishing attacks anyway. And that's a lot of phishing too. It's probably almost as much phishing as it is ransomware as it is phishing. So it gives you some idea of the power of having different protections at different layers, and why you should be really inquiring about these things when you speak to somebody about endpoint security. But obviously, what can happen is, as I said, we're not perfect. We're never going to be perfect, unfortunately. We try to be all the time, but there's a little, that 1% maybe gets through. So you've actually got someone then into the browser session. So they've actually, the browser's now going and full, they open the browser and they're trying to go there. So we have something then called the real-time shield. And basically this is almost the predictive area of things. We mentioned earlier on the predict, prevent, detect, etc., and remediate. And really at this stage, what we're doing is the real-time shield for us is an ability to instantly check through sort of partial file information whether we've seen this thing before and it's known as good or known as bad. So we're doing sort of like a check at that level. And again, this is happening before the full payload actually gets down to the device, before something actually executes on the device. So as you can see then, you've gone through multiple vectors. We've got multiple different things happening and ways happening from the link through to the website, through to to the file now downloading. And at each of these stages, we're really in preventative mode at this section. And actually, we get into the real-time shield, we're starting to turn into what I would call a detection layer. Obviously, what happens is actually there's a lot of things even within the real-time shield. I mean, I think it's like 9.5 billion bits of file information we have. So I mean, it's a pretty huge check that we're carrying out there at that time. Obviously, we can cut it down very rapidly because files, we're applying values to those files, so you can narrow it down. But it's checked against a huge amount of data, or checked against a huge amount of data, but it only actually has to obviously very quickly go to a subset. So that just gives the idea of scale. So we then have our behavior shield, and then really we're doing a number of things. And we're actually, because we don't know what it is, we're kicking in something we call monitoring and journaling, which is literally looking at, as the payload goes down, what it's actually doing to the machine, how it's trying to change any settings on those machines. And that's very key because, in fact, that allows us to remediate later on. So, and we're having our behavior shield. So we're doing then a whole lot of work, but I think one of the unique things about Webroot is we're moving a lot of the heavy lifting, if you like, of analyzing what's happening on that individual device, which is another interesting sort of concept that we tend to protect. We protect all our clients one by one, all our customers, all our endpoints, we protect one by one. So it's a slightly different way of looking at how you protect devices as well. And you need to do that because, as we said, everything's almost unique. So we're going through that whole process of discovery. We're looking at how the files and processes are behaving, and very quickly being able to determine, or trying to very quickly determine whether those are actually malicious or not. And then there's actually a stage in between. It's gone straight to auto remediation, but we can. One of the other sort of unique things I think about the way we attack it and the way that we approach, if you like, malware is that we can actually allow an infection to exist on the device until we decide it is an infection, if you know what I mean. And that's maybe a hard concept to explain, but we'll actually contain, if you like, what those files and processes can do to the system and to the certain parts of the system. We have a whole lot of things to actually contain, if you like, what's going on. And really, that ability to take time, and I'll explain that in a later slide actually, is why I think we have such a high rate of actually being able to prevent and stop malware. It's one of the other things. It's the fact that we can actually look through that stage and do that. But the unique thing is that that built into our product and automated within the product and completely in there, though you can switch off the automation if you want, is that if we find an infection and we will actually take that particular device and we'll remediate it back to the stage, surgically remediate it back to the stage as it was before. So basically any changes made are completely reversed. So the machine is literally taken back to the time before that file actually started to execute or download to execute on the device. So, and I was saying, one of the things to look at, and if you read the Gartner report, I thought, we're in Gartner and the Endpoint Magic Quadrant and things like that, and they were mentioning, they had a lot of, I would call the next generation guys that all gone into what I call the visionary quadrant. But if you read their statement about that, they actually said that one of the things about those solutions, a lot of them were sort of one-trick ponies. They looked at malware in one particular way and had one particular new way of solving that situation, and they were therefore susceptible as they grew larger to being easily circumvented by the hackers and cyber criminals. So it's just something I would point out, and sort of a lot of those products, I wouldn't say they're quite single vector, but they're almost single vector protection, and obviously it fails because if you can bypass the one barrier, then you're through and you leave a lot more. So maybe hopefully that's explained really what multi-vector is about. So I did say I was going to deal with how well we stop and stop malware. So this is looking actually at all our data for 2016, this slide. So it gives you some idea of what went on. So 1 in 40 of all new executable files we saw last year were malware. So that's about 2.5% if you want to put it into a percentage figure. The majority of those we would stop instantly. In other words, they would have what we call a zero dwell time. So we would actually recognize that that was malware pretty much off the bat. And that's about, for us, that's around about 80% or so, maybe slightly higher at that level. So if you can imagine, you've almost moved into an infection state here to a certain extent. As I said, because we work differently from other solutions, that doesn't actually really matter. There's no data being exfiltrated. The device is still protected. The user is still protected, if you like, even in those stages. And then after an hour, that 56% of previously unexecutable exfils, they're identified too. I mean, just to get through the timeline, is just basically after 12 hours, we're really up to about the 99.7%, which is our sort of consistent, I would say, average stopping rate. As I said, I think vendors are a bit loath to actually share this information with you. They rely on tests which are actually not very good at testing anything. they tend to have to test against knowns, and if you can test against knowns, even if you have simulators for unknowns, it's very difficult to get real world test results out of testing AV, and that's a reason why one of the reasons we don't participate in many of those tests is just because of that. But we actually know what our infection rate is, we know how many things slip through. We know the things that slip through as well as the things that we stop. So we think this is, from an industry perspective, we think this is actually a very high rate, and this has been consistent all the way through things like the growth in ransomware over the last 2 years, et cetera, et cetera. So in my view, we do a consistently good job, and we keep trying to do a consistently good job, and it's very important. And I think that's because we tend to look at things on a multi-vector, multi-layer approach to stopping things and preventing things, and not only just at being able to remediate the infection stage. But this obviously shows that when something is infection, we're very successful as well at that particular area. And as I said, we work in a very unique way. One of the things that all these new next generation approaches, including our own, sort of bring up is, how many false positives are you generating? And so you can see, actually this is back from February, but it's basically our classifier. In fact, this classifier is actually, it's not quite accurate in the sense because it's not just our endpoint at all, but I mean, basically it's the distribution. And you can see that if you look at the bar chart on the left, there's a count there, and then there's a score. So how we're scoring various things, if you like, within our engines. And as you can see, there's an overlap between the red and the green, if you like, or the turquoise, maybe the better color to describe. So at the 0 there. But also, if you look on the right-hand side, just to give you some idea about what the false positive rate is, it's almost, it's almost non-existent actually on that sort of chart there. So the true false positive rate is extraordinarily low. So that's very important too, because when you're looking at a solution, you want to make sure that whatever it's determining, whatever it's actually finally saying is malicious or not, is actually truly malicious and is something which is not, marking good files as bad, etc. Because that's a lot of work then on the part of the administrator to correct those things and to recognize those things, and then it breaks things stop working, and so there's a whole lot of downsides to both being, what I call false positives, which is stopping a good program. Also, false negatives on the other side is stopping something, is labeling something bad as good. That can be just as bad as well. So obviously much worse actually. So anyway, just to give you some idea of that, and I just wanted to cover that topic because it's something that people ask and come up with.
Hey, George.
Yeah.
There was a good question that's probably the right timing here. Eric is asking, if Webroot is installed on multiple devices, server one host organization has a shared folder, and then all the other devices are mapped to a shared letter drive. Should every device scan the shared folder or just the host server?
Yeah, we protect the host drive. So we do not, so for instance, if you have, each individual device has its programs running from the C drive, which is like the common way to do it, then we protect the C drive. So that is one of the limitations, I suppose, of the remediation, is that if something had slipped through and started to encrypt a network share, for instance, or another drive on that device, like a nominated D drive on that device, we would not be monitoring or journaling that activity. We protect in that sense, we protect the core system. So that's one of the reasons why you could say that nothing is 100%. There's foibles in every sort of like product for doing that, and why we sort of we constantly go out with Datto and Veeam and other things and talk about business continuity software and also about backups, because again, as I said, we're not 100% either. There's going to be stuff that slips. There's going to be a new attack vector, a script or something that's maybe not a script, but maybe an exploit that we've never ever seen before, nobody else has ever seen before, and it uses a number of devices that no AV vendor has allowed for, and I can guarantee you that stuff is all happening all the time at the moment. And in that way, we'll just go through and those things will be, those network shares or those other drives will be done in that situation too. So I don't think it's so much essential that we do that, but it's something that it's something that people should know, that we're protecting the host drive and not protecting, network shares or everything else that are folders connected to it. You can obviously set up within the console to actually scan those folders and scan separate folders, so you can scan folders outside. But that's to me is more after the horse is bolted than actually be able to stop things. I hope that was clear.
Thanks,
expand the question. I expand the question here. Actually,
I think that was it. That was the question, George. I think
all right.
Eric has
Okay.
follow up. He'll ask it. Go ahead.
No, I'm just being to be upfront about that. No, the host drive is the one we're focused on protecting, like, the core system, if you like. So a conclusion slide. I mean, you've probably read it through before I have here, but obviously, I think the thing about multi-vector protection is that you're really trying to stop attacks before an infection executes, before it actually happens. You're just trying to protect the user and the device from that. And obviously, with what we call the velocity, variety, and success rate attacks, the only really way to fight back is to have multiple layers in place within your various solutions. And to be honest with you, a lot of the endpoint vendors, a lot of the traditional endpoint vendors, and I'm talking about the Semantics, the Trend Micros, the Kaspersky's, so forth, and the other ones, they have actually, they do use multi-vector protection. They're up on that. But I think the problem with them is they use it in a very, what I would call a clunky way. They've got very large agents, very large files, and they're still relying on sort of other things to sort of, which are not so sort of neat and effective actually to stop things happening. But I mean, nonetheless, that way. And I think it's more the new gen, next gen vendors, if you like. And I mean, it's such a blurring now between that, because I think, as I said, I think a lot of the traditional vendors are becoming next gen anyway. So it's a bit of a blur field. But anyway, just look at that. Look at the multi-vector protection that those products and solutions offer, because that's very, very key. I think coming out of that, I just went on. I did start at the beginning about secure online connectivity, the identity and privacy protection, and having real-time prevention. I think is essential as well these days. And yeah, finally, just always look for technology that secures both the user and the device, and try and cover all those stages of their workplace interactions, whether that's inside or outside the office, to be honest with you as well. So
that it, George?
That is basically it. Yeah. If there are any more questions, I think
I'd
glad to take them. But
yeah, I see it. I see one, and then there, I had a couple. So it said one of the people listening said, you stated you can manually scan folders. Can Webroot set a rule or automation to scan those network folders?
Only if there's something. Only if we have an agent on that device, if you like. So it'd have to be on that device nonetheless. So if we get a network server with folders, then obviously you can automate that and schedule that. Yes.
Okay, great. Before I forget, for those that are listening, you've attached 2 handouts, and you should see that in the handout section on your GoToMeeting control panel. So I would encourage you to download those before exiting the GoToWebinar, and be able to look at those. George, you've got your email here. Perfect. That way, if they need to contact you.
Yep.
A couple of questions that I was thinking about as you were mentioning even the Equifax thing. We're getting a lot of recommendations in the news, specifically like the FBI telling us to do things, et cetera. And I remember reading one place where the FBI had said, advising people to pay for crypto ransomware. What's your thoughts there?
My thoughts are that you shouldn't have to if you've actually set up your security layers properly. And given the fact that ransomware is so prevalent these days, and I can't remember the stat again, but it's something huge. It's like over 60% of organizations have either experienced some form of ransomware or had a ransomware attack. I mean, it's huge. My feeling about it is, as long as people pay up, then it will persist. You know, the reason that those guys can afford to invest in people and time and energy to find new ways to launch ransomware attacks and to extort money out of people is because they pay up. So I know the FBI, actually the FBI, to be fair to them, have given different advice at different times. I know they said, you know, don't pay and pay up, and I think people have vacillate. But I think from a security perspective, there is, and as I said, nothing is 100%, but nonetheless, even with things not being 100%, you should be able to plan and equip an organization these days with enough defenses and enough different things to stop the impact of ransomware from, you know, requiring you to pay up and to extort. You know, as I said, a lot of that's to do with obviously a whole lot of different things. And when we give a guide, we actually give a guide out to, I think we've got an MSP guide and we've got a standard guide to, you know, to ransomware, and it gives a whole lot of different things people should do to sort of, you know, to cut down the risk both on the device, but also sort of, you know, more things like, you know, doing, you know, the patch management side of it. I mean, again, if you look at the Equifax or you look at a lot of the other attacks that go into place that are successful, I mean, it also emerged that, you know, Equifax hadn't patched certain servers. They had an Apache vulnerability that had been, you know, been sorted out for ages, and obviously their patching regime was not thorough. And if, you know, maybe the attack couldn't have happened if that patch had been in place. So, you know, patching regimes are, you know, all the standard things that people should be doing when they're looking after the security is about those layers. I mean, you know, applications have vulnerabilities the whole time. I mean, my organization, I know today, is we're updating our Adobe, you know, Adobe readers, because Adobe is constantly attacked for things. So, you know, keeping Adobe bang up to date and all those things is really very key because of, you know, application type attacks. And those applications also tend to sit into, you know, they fix into browsers, they, you know, they interrelate with a whole lot of other things within the device. So, you know, patching, regular backups, so at least you've got some point of time you can go back to and recover data from, are all going to be key. And also having, you know, a defense in place is going to stop most of it, which, you know, I'm happy to say I think Webroot do a good job of that. I think there's other people do a good job too. But really, essentially, you got something to do that.
All right. Well, we've got 4 more questions already, so I'm going to load you up here.
Wow.
So if the firewall can handle malware and AV, and the end user device has AV software on it, why isn't that sufficient enough?
Yeah, I mean, so you've layered up. So you've got a gateway AV, which might be different from the anti-malware or AV that you've got on the endpoint. The answer to that is that it's going to do a little bit better. You're going to have a margin. I mean, you know, different products look at different things. So, you know, the gateway AV might spot something which actually the desktop one, especially if it's from a different vendor. But even with those 2 layers, you're probably not getting to 100%. I mean, I know, for instance, there's an AV vendor I know, but probably everybody else knows, but I mean, I won't mention their name, but they actually sell their own AV, and then they sell a sort of like an anti-ransomware add-on, if you like, which is actually quite expensive, by the by. But the add-on that, and what's happening is, yes, they're reducing the risk of ransomware by that add-on, but the increment that you're getting from that is very, very small. So if you're at 99.7, you might be moving to 99.85, 99.9, but you've still got that gap of, you know, you still got that vulnerability still there for that 0.0%, 1%. If you just happen to be the person that gets that attack and it's not detected, then it's through the defense. So whereas that's a great practice to have, you know, obviously some sort of firewall and some sort of, you need some barrier there, and you maybe want a gateway AV there, et cetera, or you're looking at malware at that stage. It's probably doing a different task, and you're not going to get 100%. Even between those 2, you're not going to get 100%. So I would still then be looking at, I mean, I think you've always got to plan it for the worst case scenario in security. So you got to say, if I get ransomware, how can I recover? And, you know, in the end, it's going to be those offline backups. It's going to be some system where you're backing up, and it can't be reached by you know, hackers through another device. That you're able to, you know, able to recover. And a lot of vendors out there, especially in the MSP space, but also for small businesses as well, sell very cost-effective cloud services maybe cloud and on-premise mixed, that do a very, very good job of doing that. I mean, the staggering stat is as well that, I think, a lot of small businesses, when they get attacked and they get knocked out by ransomware, a lot of them actually never come back. A lot of them fail as businesses. It might take them a few months, but basically the damage is so severe and the recovery time is so long that they're literally taken out of business. And that's, it's nothing any of us want to see. And I think, multi-vector protection is as much about multi-layers as well. It's different, vectors is really, the attack vectors people talk about, but the fact is that having something to handle each of those different things when it actually happens, and planning for that worst case.
Hey,
Sorry,
George.
I rambled a little bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say we got 5 more questions, and just a couple more minutes. So let's see if we can get these. So I won't mention the name of the vendor, but this person is saying that another vendor has a team that works on decrypting files. Does Webroot have a team to help with this type of issue?
We don't.
Okay.
I'll just say that. Yeah.
Yep. All right.
We to put it fairly, if we can find a tool anywhere that will help decrypt files and help the person through, our support organization will do that for them. But we do not ourselves have a team that's just looking at that. I mean, we've got people that are looking out there and finding those tools if they exist and employing them, but we don't have a team doing it.
Okay. Can I custom config endpoints like whitelisting URLs, excluding file types at the endpoint or SIT level, situation level, maybe that? Situation
level, yeah. The answer to that is you can white and blacklist files. If you wanted to create an individual user policy and white and blacklist, you could do that. So you can definitely do that. And what was the first part of that question? I think the answer is yes, but.
Can I custom config endpoints like whitelisting URLs, file types, etc.?
And yes, with URLs now, we've given ability as well. We've just added that to Web Threat Shield, the ability to look at the URL side as well. But I think you're going to look at URLs. We have another solution, which is our DNS solution, DNS Protection solution, which basically protects the DNS connection to the internet in the first place, and then allows you to apply policies down to an IP address, if you like, and say, well, I only want such and such URL for this IP address or whatever.
There's a follow-up question by the same person. Says my site layout in Autotask is not mirrored in Webroot. Can I automate this?
So I can repeat that. I just didn't catch that. I've got the Autotask part, so they're there.
It's not mirrored in Webroot. Can I automate this?
We have a tool called Unity API. And so all I can say truthfully is potentially yes.
Maybe they should contact you at your email address.
Yeah, my email address is there. So yeah, they can send me further detail on that, and I can send them, if they're interested in knowing about Unity API, I can send them more information on that as well.
Okay, so Victor, I think reach out to George there on his email address. Carol's asking about access to the guides that you mentioned in ransomware, and we'll definitely send those, Carol, to you via email. And
yeah, we can do that. We can just add that. I'll get Parry, who's our marketing person, to add that and get that to you, so you can set all the attendees can have that.
Yep. And then follow-up question from a previous one, and this is the one where the question was regarding if I have a firewall blocking and then I have AV on the end user device. So the follow-up question is, what latency is your software introducing into the network?
Almost zero. I would say that typically, because we don't require updates, and because we're exchanging, we use very sort of small encrypted hashes to communicate back out to the cloud. Our typical usage in a day for an endpoint device is around about maybe 250 kilobytes of traffic throughout the whole 8-hour day. So there's no latency involved with that. That's just that the traffic volume is very small on the network. Full stop. Especially when you compare it to an AV, when you maybe a traditional AV where you'll be downloading definition update files, which are pretty large and pretty huge. So very small. And then if you're trying something like DNS service, I mean, it's almost zero latency, because you can if you're doing something on a DNS connection, you're basically it's just like a check as it's happening, and it's minuscule. In fact, we do measure that sort of thing. We have sort of reports come back about what the latency is about the service, if you like, in different parts of the world, and I mean, it's literally milliseconds. So it's very small.
So I think, George, the last question that I was thinking about, and I don't remember if you mentioned it, do you have any new products coming out that we'd be interested in?
I think what's probably the thing that we're sort of in a beta at the moment with a lot of our existing customers is security awareness training. We deal with about 9.5, nearly 10,000 MSPs now sort of use Webroot, and we constantly ask those MSPs, what would you like us to deliver in the way of solutions to you? And I think the thing that was coming out is almost 8 out of 10 of the MSPs were saying, well, actually, we see security awareness training as a sort of a key thing to offer our businesses, because it's that user factor. If we can stop that user, doing things like clicking on things when they shouldn't, or not understanding the implications of having a strong password or sharing credentials, things. If we can educate people about the things they need to be educated about, then that's key. So we launched that. That's in mid-October, so it's not very far away. We're just about to do another version of our DNS as well. That comes out in actually October 9th. So we've got two things happening very close together there. So those are going on, and then later on in the year, we're actually coming out with a network solution. So another company we acquired. In fact, there's some information about that on the website just now. It's called Flowscape, or we're calling the solution Flowscape anyway, and there's some details going on about that. But that's as a product and a solution, really as a secure anywhere solution, that's going to be a little bit later this year. So lots happening, too much happening actually.
Too much is a good thing sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
All right. Well, George, very informative. I appreciate you talking to us today. And for those that joined us, we will have a recording of this on Experts Exchange in the Webroot section. Oh, well, I'll try to squeeze in this last question that just came in. What is George's advice on the 10 and over letter passwords? 10 characters, I'm guessing 10 characters or more.
My rule on my feeling on passwords generally is that passwords are I would look at something else. I would look at something else in addition to password. I know there's theories about the length of the password and how long it's. I mean, obviously, strong passwords are better than a weak password. So let's
maybe
start that argument. Any good long strong password is going to be better than sort of like a weak type password. But in the end, I think I tried to mention a little bit. I mean, I think second, strong authentication, having some secondary authentication in addition to password and username is getting pretty much pretty much going to go to become the standard. I think it's.
Yeah. I know that. Yeah, George, that's what we use here at Experts Exchange is two-factor authentication. So I think that's definitely important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, George, and we'll have this posted on Experts Exchange in the next couple of days so people can review it. And Carol will get that ransomware stuff out. Anybody else that's interested, just send George an email at his email address there.
Yep, great.
Thank you very much.